The elevator lurched to a violent stop between the 15th and 16th floors, and Emma Roberts realized her perfectly planned evening had just become a complete disaster. She was supposed to be watching the premiere of the most anticipated indie film of the year at the Los Angeles Film Festival, not trapped in a metal box with a stranger who smelled like expensive cologne and looked like he had stepped straight out of a magazine cover. "Well, this is inconvenient," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement that made Emma want to simultaneously laugh and scream. He was tall, with dark hair that seemed perpetually tousled in that effortless way that probably took an hour to achieve, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Everything about him screamed money and privilege, from his perfectly tailored blazer to the watch that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. Emma pressed the emergency button with more force than necessary, her vintage band t-shirt suddenly feeling too casual next to his polished appearance. Inconvenient is an understatement. I have been looking forward to tonight for months, and now I am going to miss the opening because of a malfunctioning elevator. You are here for the festival too? He leaned against the wall with the kind of casual elegance that suggested he had never encountered a problem money could not solve. I am Christopher Russo, but everyone calls me Chris. Emma Roberts, she replied, noting how his eyes seemed to study her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter in ways she definitely did not have time for. And yes, I am here for the festival, or rather, I was supposed to be. The emergency phone crackled to life, and a bored security guard informed them that the repair crew would not arrive for at least 2 hours. Emma sank against the opposite wall, her carefully planned evening crumbling around her. She had saved for months to afford the festival pass, had researched every film, had even bought a new dress that was currently hanging uselessly in her closet because she had decided comfort was more important than fashion. 2 hours, Chris repeated, and something in his tone made Emma look up. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something between sympathy and calculation. That is quite a long time to spend with a complete stranger. Trust me, I am just as thrilled about this situation as you are, Emma shot back, though she noticed he did not seem particularly distressed about their predicament. In fact, if she did not know better, she would say he looked almost pleased. Chris pulled out his phone, and Emma caught a glimpse of multiple missed calls and text messages flooding his screen. Someone was clearly desperate to reach him, but he simply turned the phone face down without responding to any of them. Actually, I think this might be exactly what I needed. Being trapped in an elevator is what you needed. Emma raised an eyebrow, wondering if maybe the lack of oxygen was already affecting his brain. That is quite possibly the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me. I was supposed to meet someone tonight, Chris said, settling more comfortably against the wall as if he was preparing to stay a while. Someone I've been avoiding for weeks. My mother has been planning this introduction for months, and she has made it clear that my attendance is not optional. Emma felt a flicker of sympathy despite herself. Ah, the dreaded family setup. Let me guess, the daughter of one of her country club friends who has all the right credentials and absolutely zero personality. You have met Vanessa Wellington, I see, Chris said with a laugh that transformed his entire face, making him seem younger and infinitely more approachable. Though to be fair, she has plenty of personality. It is just all terrible. Despite her frustration about missing the film, Emma found herself smiling. So, you are using our mechanical malfunction as an excuse to avoid your date. That is both pathetic and brilliant. I prefer to think of it as fate intervening, Chris replied, and something in the way he said it made Emma's heart skip a beat. Besides, I would much rather spend the evening talking to someone who is here because she loves film, not because her mother thinks I would make a suitable husband. The word husband hung in the air between them, and Emma felt her cheeks flush. She had been so focused on her career lately, working long hours at the occupational health clinic and saving every penny for her small luxuries like festival tickets, that she had not thought about dating in months. But there was something about Chris that made her wonder what she had been missing. So, what kind of films do you like? Emma asked, desperate to change the subject before her thoughts wandered into dangerous territory. Please tell me you are not one of those people who only watches superhero movies. I actually prefer independent films, Chris said, and Emma tried not to look too surprised. Character-driven stories, complex narratives, I find them more authentic than the big-budget productions. Really? Emma leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. What was the last indie film you watched? Chris was quiet for a moment, and Emma caught something that looked almost like embarrassment cross his features. I have to confess, it has been a while. Work has been consuming most of my time lately, and when I do have free time, my family has very specific ideas about how I should spend it. That sounds exhausting, Emma said softly, and she meant it. Despite their obviously different backgrounds, she recognized the weight of family expectations in his voice. What kind of work keeps you so busy? Transportation, Chris said vaguely, and Emma sensed there was more to the story. My family has a business, and I help run it. What about you? What do you do when you are not getting trapped in elevators? I am a social worker, Emma replied, watching his face carefully for the usual reaction. People either became overly sympathetic or slightly uncomfortable when she mentioned her profession, as if helping people in crisis was either saintly or depressing. But Chris just nodded thoughtfully. That must be challenging work, rewarding, but challenging. It is, Emma agreed, surprised by his genuine response. Some days are harder than others, but I love being able to make a difference, even if it is just for one person at a time. They talked for another hour, their conversation flowing with an ease that surprised them both. Chris told her about his love of hiking and his pet rabbit named Serene, which made Emma laugh until her sides hurt. Emma shared stories about her record collection and her mischievous dog Ryo, who had once eaten an entire vinyl record because he was jealous of the attention she was giving it. You named your dog Lightning? Chris asked, his pronunciation of the Portuguese word surprisingly good. You speak Portuguese? Emma was impressed despite herself. A little. I studied it in college, and we have some business connections in Brazil. Chris seemed to catch himself before saying more, and Emma noticed how he always deflected when the conversation turned to specifics about his work or family. The emergency phone rang again, interrupting the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. The repair crew had arrived, and they would be freed within the next 30 minutes. Emma felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She had been dreading this evening turning into a disaster, but somehow it had become something else entirely. Well, Chris said, standing and extending his hand to help her up, I suppose our adventure is coming to an end. Emma took his hand, noting how warm and steady it felt in hers. I suppose it is. Thank you for making it bearable. Thank you for making it memorable, Chris replied, and there was something in his eyes that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. As the elevator lurched back to life and began its descent to the lobby, Emma realized that her evening had not been ruined after all. It had been completely transformed. But as the doors opened and the real world rushed back in, she wondered if whatever had happened between them in that small enclosed space could survive outside of it. Chris stepped out first, then turned back to face her. Emma, I know this might sound crazy, but would you like to have coffee sometime? When we are not trapped in an elevator, I mean. Emma opened her mouth to say yes, but before she could speak, a woman's voice cut through the lobby noise like a knife. Christopher, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. Emma turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed woman striding toward them, her expression a mixture of relief and irritation. Behind her, an older couple followed, the woman bearing such a strong resemblance to Chris that Emma knew immediately this had to be his mother. Chris's entire demeanor changed in an instant, his shoulders tensing as he stepped slightly away from Emma. Mother, I can explain. But Emma was already backing away, the fairy tale spell of the last 2 hours breaking as reality crashed down around her. Of course he had a girlfriend. Of course his family was here. Of course she had been foolish to think that someone like Chris could be interested in someone like her. It was nice meeting you, Christopher, she said formally, using his full name deliberately. Good luck with your evening. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding with embarrassment and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. Behind her, she could hear Chris calling her name, but she did not turn around. As Emma stepped out into the Los Angeles night, she told herself that it had been nothing more than an interesting interlude, a story she would tell her friends about the time she got trapped in an elevator with a handsome stranger. But deep down, she knew it had been something more, something that could have been the beginning of everything if only circumstances had been different. 3 weeks later, Emma was trying to forget all about Christopher Russo and failing miserably. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still smell his cologne and hear the sound of his laugh echoing in that small elevator. She had thrown herself into work with renewed vigor, taking on extra cases and staying late at the clinic. But nothing seemed to quiet the persistent ache in her chest. "You are being ridiculous," she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the occupational health clinic where she worked. "You spent 2 hours with a complete stranger. This is not a Nicholas Sparks novel." But even as she said it, Emma knew she was lying to herself. Those 2 hours had felt more real and meaningful than entire relationships she had endured in the past. There had been something electric in the air between them, something that made her believe in possibilities she had long since dismissed as fairy tale nonsense. Her phone buzzed with a text from her cousin Diego, the photographer who was always trying to drag her to various cultural events around the city. "Gallery opening tonight in Beverly Hills. Come with me. You need to get out of that apartment." Emma stared at the message, tempted to decline as she had been doing for weeks. But maybe Diego was right. Maybe she needed to stop hiding and start living again. She typed back quickly before she could change her mind. "Pick me up at 7. The gallery was everything Emma expected it to be. Pretentious, overcrowded, and filled with people who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. She immediately regretted coming, but Diego was already deep in conversation with another photographer, and she did not want to be rude by leaving immediately. She was studying a particularly abstract painting and trying to understand what the artist was attempting to convey when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "I think it is supposed to represent the chaos of modern urban life, but honestly, it just looks like someone spilled paint and called it art." Emma's heart stopped. She turned slowly, hoping desperately that she was imagining things. But there he was. Chris stood a few feet away, looking just as handsome as she remembered, in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Christopher," she said coolly, proud of how steady her voice sounded, despite the fact that her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone in the gallery could hear it. "Emma?" His face lit up with genuine pleasure, and she had to remind herself of how their last encounter had ended. "I cannot believe you are here. I have been hoping I would run into you again." "Have you?" Emma raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms defensively. "How convenient. Is your girlfriend here too? Or perhaps your mother has arranged another introduction for you tonight." Chris winced, and Emma felt a small satisfaction at hitting her mark. "About that night, I can explain everything. It is not what you think." "It is exactly what I think," Emma replied, though she could not help noticing that he looked genuinely distressed. "You were avoiding some woman your mother wanted you to meet, so you used our trapped elevator as an excuse. I get it. I was convenient. That is not—" Chris ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. "Okay, that is partially true, but you do not understand the whole situation." "Then explain it," Emma challenged, surprised by her own boldness. She had spent 3 weeks telling herself she did not care, but apparently she cared very much indeed. Chris glanced around the crowded gallery, then took her elbow gently. "Not here. Too many people. Can we go somewhere private to talk?" Every rational part of Emma's brain screamed at her to say no and walk away. But the look in his eyes was so sincere, so desperate, that she found herself nodding. "Fine. 5 minutes." He led her out onto a small balcony overlooking the city lights. The evening air was warm, and Emma could smell jasmine from the garden below. It would have been romantic if she was not so determined to protect her heart from further damage. "The woman you saw that night was not my girlfriend," Chris began, leaning against the balcony railing. "Her name is Vanessa Wellington, and my mother has been trying to arrange a marriage between us for months." An arranged marriage? Emma could not hide her surprise. "This is 2024, not the 19th century. Tell that to my mother," Chris said with a bitter laugh. "She believes that marriage should be a business arrangement between suitable families. Vanessa's father owns a shipping company, and my mother thinks combining our businesses would be advantageous." Despite her determination to remain unmoved, Emma felt her anger beginning to soften. "And you do not want to marry her?" "I would rather marry my rabbit," Chris said emphatically, and Emma had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. "Vanessa is beautiful and accomplished, but she is also cold, calculating, and completely uninterested in anything that does not directly benefit her social status. The thought of spending the rest of my life with her makes me want to move to a desert island. So, why do you not just tell your mother no?" Chris was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. "It is complicated. My family's business went through a very difficult period several years ago. We almost lost everything, and I was the one who managed to save it. Since then, my mother has been controlling. She thinks she knows what is best for everyone, especially me." Emma studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands gripped the railing. "She is trying to control your personal life because you saved the family business? She thinks I am too focused on work, that I need someone who understands our world, our responsibilities." Chris turned to face her, and Emma was struck by the vulnerability in his expression. "She does not understand that I do not want someone who understands that world. I want someone who can help me remember there is more to life than business and social obligations." "Someone like a social worker who collects vintage records and gets trapped in elevators?" Emma asked softly. "Someone exactly like that," Chris said, stepping closer. "Emma, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that night. I know we only spent 2 hours together, but it felt more real than anything I have experienced in years." Emma's resolve was crumbling, but she forced herself to remember the pain of walking away from him 3 weeks ago. "Even if that is true, what has changed? Your mother still wants you to marry Vanessa Wellington. Your family still expects you to live according to their rules. What has changed is that I realized I do not want to live my entire life trying to meet other people's expectations," Chris said, reaching out to touch her hand. "That night in the elevator, I remembered who I used to be before family obligations and business pressures took over my life. I remembered what it felt like to laugh, to connect with someone, to hope for something more." Emma looked down at their joined hands, her heart racing. "Chris, I know this is complicated," he interrupted gently. "I know my family situation is messy, and I know you have every right to tell me to go away and never bother you again. But I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that what happened between us was real." Before Emma could respond, her cousin Diego appeared on the balcony, looking flustered and apologetic. "Emma, I am so sorry to interrupt, but there is a situation inside. Someone recognized you and started asking questions about your work at the clinic. I think it might be a reporter." Emma's blood ran cold. The occupational health clinic where she worked had been in the news recently due to a controversial case involving workplace safety violations at a major corporation. The last thing she needed was unwanted media attention. "I have to go," she said quickly, dropping Chris's hand. "Diego, we need to leave now." "Wait," Chris called after her as she headed for the door. "Emma, please, can I call you? Can we finish this conversation?" Emma paused at the balcony door, torn between her growing feelings for him and her practical need to protect herself. "I do not think that is a good idea, Christopher. Your world and mine, they are just too different." But as she walked away for the second time, Emma could not shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. Behind her, she could hear Chris calling her name, but she did not turn around. She could not afford to weaken her resolve again. As Diego drove her home through the winding streets of Los Angeles, Emma stared out the window and wondered if she was being smart or simply cowardly. All she knew for certain was that Christopher Russo had the power to turn her carefully ordered life upside down, and she was not sure she was brave enough to let him. "So, who was that guy?" Diego asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "No one important," Emma lied, but even as she said it, she knew it was not true. Chris was becoming very important indeed, and that terrified her more than she was willing to admit. Emma spent the next week throwing herself into her work with a determination that worried her colleagues. She took on the most difficult cases, stayed late every night, and volunteered for weekend shifts. Anything to keep her mind off the look in Chris's eyes when she had walked away from him for the second time. But her strategy was failing spectacularly. Every time her phone rang, her heart leapt with the hope that it might be him. Every time she saw a tall, dark-haired man on the street, she did a double-take. She was becoming pathetic, and she knew it. "You look terrible," her friend and co-worker Sarah announced during their lunch break on Friday. "And before you argue with me, I mean that in the most loving way possible. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I am fine," Emma insisted, picking at her salad without enthusiasm. "Just busy with the Henderson case." "The Henderson case has been closed for 3 days, Sarah pointed out with the kind of patience that came from dealing with stubborn clients all day. "Emma, what is going on with you? You have been acting strange for weeks." Emma considered lying, but Sarah had been her friend since their social work program in college. She had a talent for seeing through Emma's defenses. "I met someone. That is wonderful." Sarah's face lit up with excitement. "Tell me everything. Is he cute? What does he do? When do I get to meet him?" "It is complicated," Emma said, the same words Chris had used at the gallery. He is not like us, Sarah. His family has money, serious money, and they want him to marry someone from their world." "Ah," Sarah said, her expression growing more serious. "One of those situations. But if he wants to be with you instead of Miss Moneybags, what is the problem?" "The problem is that I do not know if he really wants to be with me or if I am just a convenient distraction from his family's expectations," Emma explained, finally voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. "What if I am just his way of rebelling against Mommy and Daddy?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying Emma's face. "Has it occurred to you that you might be using his family situation as an excuse to avoid taking a risk?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that you have spent the last 3 years focused entirely on work and building your career," Sarah said gently. "You have not dated anyone seriously since Marcus, and that disaster was 2 years ago. Maybe you are scared of opening yourself up to someone again, and his complicated family situation gives you a perfect excuse to run away." Emma wanted to argue, but Sarah's words hit uncomfortably close to home. Marcus had been a fellow social worker who had seemed perfect on paper, but had turned out to be controlling and manipulative. The relationship had ended badly, and Emma had thrown herself into work to avoid dealing with the emotional fallout. "Even if that is true," Emma said defensively, "it does not change the fact that his mother wants him to marry someone else, someone more suitable. So fight for him," Sarah said simply. "If he is worth it, fight for him. Stop letting other people's opinions dictate your happiness." That afternoon, Emma found herself walking through Griffith Park, her usual route when she needed to think. Ryo bounded ahead of her, chasing squirrels and generally being his usual energetic self. The physical activity usually helped clear her mind, but today her thoughts kept circling back to Chris and the impossible situation they found themselves in. She was so distracted that she almost missed the familiar figure sitting on a bench near the observatory. Almost, but not quite. Her heart stopped when she recognized the profile, the way he sat with perfect posture, even when he was clearly lost in thought. Chris looked up as if he had sensed her presence, and their eyes met across the path. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryo, oblivious to the tension, bounded over to investigate the interesting new person. "Well, hello there," Chris said, smiling as he reached down to pet the excited dog. "You must be Ryo. I've heard a lot about you." "Chris," Emma said, walking slowly toward the bench. "What are you doing here?" "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he said, scratching behind Ryo's ears in a way that made the dog practically melt with happiness. "I did not expect to see you. I walk here most days after work," Emma said, settling onto the other end of the bench with careful distance between them. "Ryo needs the exercise, and I need the quiet." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city spread out below them as the sun began to set. Despite everything that had happened between them, Emma felt her shoulders relax for the first time in days. "I have been thinking about what you said at the gallery," Chris said eventually, "about our worlds being too different. And I think you are right, but not in the way you mean." Chris turned to face her, and Emma was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "Our worlds are different, but that does not have to be a bad thing. Maybe we each have something the other needs." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you remind me of who I want to be," Chris said simply. "When I am with you, I remember that there is more to life than quarterly reports and board meetings. You make me want to be better, to do something meaningful with my life, instead of just maintaining what my family has built." Emma felt her heart flutter despite her efforts to remain unmoved. "And what do I get out of this arrangement?" Chris smiled, and Emma was reminded of why she had been so drawn to him in the first place. "You get someone who will support your dreams, who will never try to change you or make you fit into a mold you were not meant for. You get someone who thinks your record collection is fascinating instead of quirky, who wants to hear about your work instead of pretending to listen." "That sounds too good to be true," Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe it is," Chris admitted. "Maybe I am being naive about how difficult this would be. But Emma, I have spent my entire adult life doing what other people expected of me, and I'm tired of it. I want to try being happy for once." Emma looked down at Ryo, who had settled at Chris's feet, and was looking up at him with obvious adoration. Even her dog liked him. It was almost unfair. "What about your mother? What about Vanessa Wellington and the arranged marriage?" "I had lunch with my mother yesterday," Chris said, and something in his tone made Emma look up sharply. "I told her that I will not be marrying Vanessa or anyone else she chooses for me. I told her that when I decide to get married, it will be to someone I choose, someone who makes me happy." "How did she take that?" "About as well as you would expect," Chris said with a rueful laugh. "She threatened to cut me off from the family business, to write me out of her will, to never speak to me again. The usual maternal guilt tactics." Emma felt a pang of sympathy mixed with admiration. "That must have been difficult." "It was terrifying," Chris admitted, "but also liberating. For the first time in years, I feel like I am in control of my own life." "What happens now?" "Now I'm hoping that a certain social worker who collects vintage records will give me a chance to prove that some fairy tales can come true, even in real life." Chris reached over and took her hand, and this time Emma did not pull away. "Emma, I know this is scary. I know there are no guarantees. But I am asking you to take a leap of faith with me." Emma looked down at their joined hands, then up at Chris's hopeful face. She thought about Sarah's words, about the possibility that she was using his family situation as an excuse to avoid taking a risk. She thought about the way her heart had been aching for the past month, and the way it felt suddenly lighter just from sitting next to him. "One date," she said finally. "A real date, not a chance encounter or an emergency situation. If you can survive a normal evening with me without any drama or family interference, then maybe we can talk about taking that leap of faith." Chris's face broke into a grin that transformed his entire appearance. "One date, I can work with that when?" "Tomorrow night," Emma said impulsively. 7 o'clock. "And Chris, I choose the place." "Deal," Chris said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I will pick you up at 7. As Emma walked home with Ryo trotting contentedly beside her, she told herself that she was just being practical. One date would prove whether there was really something between them, or if it had all been wishful thinking and elevator-induced proximity. But deep down, she knew she was already falling, and for the first time in years, she was not sure she wanted to catch herself. Saturday evening arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train, and Emma found herself changing clothes for the fourth time in an hour. She had told Chris she was choosing the place, but now she was second-guessing her decision. What if he hated her choice? What if he was expecting something fancy and sophisticated? "You are overthinking this," she told her reflection, settling finally on a simple sundress and cardigan. "It is just dinner." But even as she said it, Emma knew it was not just dinner. This felt like a crossroads, a moment that could change everything. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Outside whenever you are ready. No pressure. See." Emma peeked out her window and felt her heart skip a beat. Chris was leaning against a modest sedan, not the flashy sports car she had been expecting. He was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. When he spotted her in the window, he waved and smiled, and Emma felt her nervous tension begin to ease. "Okay, Ryo," she said to her dog, who was watching her with obvious amusement. "Wish me luck." "You look beautiful," Chris said as she approached, and the sincerity in his voice made Emma blush. "Thank you. You look pretty good yourself," she gestured to his car. "This is not what I was expecting." "What were you expecting?" "I do not know. Something flashier, more expensive?" Chris laughed as he opened the passenger door for her. "I save the flashy cars for impressing business associates. For dates with women I actually like, I prefer something more comfortable." The restaurant Emma had chosen was a small, family-owned Mexican place in her neighborhood, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus that served the best tacos in the city. She watched Chris's face carefully as they walked in, looking for any sign of disappointment or judgment. Instead, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "This place smells incredible. How did you find it?" "I live 3 blocks away," Emma said, relaxing for the first time all day. "The owner, Mrs. Garcia, makes everything from scratch. Her grandmother's recipes." They were seated at a small table near the window, and Emma was struck by how natural it felt to be there with him. The nervous energy that had been plaguing her all day began to fade as they fell into easy conversation over chips and salsa. "So, tell me about your work," Emma said, genuinely curious. "And not the vague transportation answer you gave me before. What do you actually do?" Chris took a sip of his beer, considering his words carefully. "My family owns a transportation company. We started with a small trucking business, but over the years we have expanded into regional airlines and freight shipping. I help oversee operations and handle strategic planning." "That sounds important," Emma said, and she meant it. "You mentioned that you saved the company during a difficult period. The 2008 financial crisis hit us hard," Chris said, his expression growing more serious. "We had expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt. We were looking at bankruptcy, massive layoffs, losing everything my grandfather had built." "What did you do?" "I convinced my father to let me restructure our entire operation. We sold off the parts of the business that were not profitable, renegotiated our debt, and focused on our core strengths. It took 3 years, but we not only survived, we came back stronger than before." Emma studied his face, noting the pride mixed with exhaustion in his expression. "How old were you when this happened?" 24, Chris said quietly. "Fresh out of business school and terrified that I was going to be responsible for destroying my family's legacy." "But you were not. You saved it." Emma reached across the table and touched his hand. "That must have been an incredible amount of pressure." "It was. But it also taught me that I am capable of more than I ever imagined. The problem is, ever since then, my family has treated me like I am made of glass and gold simultaneously. They want to protect me and control me at the same time. Hence the arranged marriage," Emma said with understanding. "Hence the arranged marriage," Chris agreed. "My mother thinks I need someone who will take care of me, someone who understands the pressures of running a family business. She does not understand that what I really need is someone who sees me as more than just the guy who saved the company. Their food arrived, and Emma was pleased to see Chris dig into his tacos with obvious enjoyment. There was something endearing about watching this polished, successful man get salsa on his chin and not care. "What about you?" Chris asked between bites. "What made you want to become a social worker?" "I have always been drawn to helping people," Emma said, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him about her work. "When I was in college, I volunteered at a crisis center, and I realized that I wanted to spend my life making a difference, even if it was just one person at a time. That must be emotionally draining." "Sometimes," Emma admitted, "but it is also incredibly rewarding. Last month, I helped a woman escape an abusive relationship and find housing for her and her 2 children. She sent me a photo of them at her daughter's school play, and they were all smiling. Moments like that make all the difficult days worth it." Chris was looking at her with such admiration that Emma felt her cheeks flush. "You are remarkable, you know that? I'm just doing my job." "No, you are changing lives. You are making the world better in concrete, measurable ways." "That is remarkable." They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their families, their dreams, their fears. Emma learned that Chris had wanted to be a wildlife photographer when he was young, before family obligations redirected his path. Chris learned that Emma had once considered joining the Peace Corps before deciding she could make more impact working in her own community. As they walked back to his car, Emma felt a contentment she had not experienced in years. The evening had been perfect in its simplicity, and she was no longer questioning whether there was something real between them. The connection was undeniable. "So," Chris said as he drove her home, "did I pass the test?" "What test?" "The normal evening without drama or family interference test. I believe that was the requirement for discussing leaps of faith." Emma smiled, remembering her challenge from the day before. "You passed, with flying colors actually." "Good, because I have a confession to make." Chris pulled up in front of her apartment building and turned to face her. "That was not entirely without family interference." Emma's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I mean that my phone has been buzzing all evening with calls and texts from my mother, my brothers, and yes, even Vanessa Wellington. They are all demanding to know where I am and who I am with." "And what did you tell them?" "Nothing," Chris said simply. "I turned my phone off after the first 3 calls and ignored them completely, because for the first time in my adult life, I prioritized what I wanted over what my family expected." Emma felt a warm glow spread through her chest. "That must have been difficult." "It was surprisingly easy," Chris admitted. "Being with you makes everything else seem less important." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Emma realized she did not want the evening to end. But before she could figure out how to extend it, Chris's expression suddenly changed, his eyes focusing on something behind her. "Emma," he said quietly, "do not turn around, but I think we have company." Emma's blood ran cold. "What kind of company? The expensive car, designer suit, disapproving mother kind of company?" Despite his warning, Emma turned to look and immediately spotted the sleek black sedan parked across the street. Through the windshield, she could see an elegant older woman watching them with the kind of intensity that made Emma's skin crawl. "Your mother?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "My mother," Chris confirmed grimly. "And knowing her, she probably has a photographer with her to document my scandalous behavior." Emma felt suddenly exposed, as if she was being judged and found wanting by someone she had never even met. "What do we do?" "We do not let her ruin what has been a perfect evening," Chris said firmly. He got out of the car and walked around to open Emma's door, deliberately taking his time and making it clear that he was not intimidated by his mother's surveillance. As Emma stood up, she caught a glimpse of movement in the black sedan. The passenger door opened, and an older woman emerged, moving toward them with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she was accustomed to getting her way in all situations. "Christopher Michael Russo," the woman called out in a voice that could have cut glass. What exactly do you think you are doing? Chris straightened his shoulders and turned to face his mother, but he kept one hand on Emma's back in a gesture of protection and solidarity. Good evening, Mother. I'm walking my date to her door. I believe that is what gentlemen are supposed to do. The woman's gaze shifted to Emma, and Emma felt herself being evaluated from head to toe in a way that made her want to hide behind Chris. Mrs. Russo was beautiful in the way that money and good breeding could make someone beautiful, but her eyes were cold and calculating. "And you are?" Mrs. Russo asked Emma directly, her tone suggesting that Emma was an unpleasant surprise that needed to be dealt with quickly. "Emma Roberts," Emma replied, forcing herself to stand straighter and meet the woman's gaze directly. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Russo." "I wish I could say the same," Mrs. Russo replied coolly. "Christopher, we need to talk. Now." "Actually, we do not," Chris said, and Emma was impressed by how calm he sounded, despite the tension radiating from his body. "My personal life is no longer subject to your approval or interference. Your personal life affects the entire family," Mrs. Russo snapped. "Do you have any idea what Vanessa's father will think when he hears about this? Do you understand what this could do to our business relationship?" "I understand that you are more concerned about impressing the Wellingtons than you are about my happiness," Chris replied, and Emma could hear years of frustration in his voice. "But that is your problem, not mine." Mrs. Russo's eyes flashed with anger, and she stepped closer to her son. "Christopher, you are making a mistake that could destroy everything we have worked for. This girl," she gestured dismissively at Emma, "she is not suitable for someone in your position." Emma felt as if she had been slapped. She had known this confrontation was coming eventually, but experiencing the reality of Mrs. Russo's disapproval was more painful than she had anticipated. "Her name is Emma," Chris said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level, "and she is more suitable for me than any woman you have ever tried to force on me. She is kind, intelligent, passionate about her work, and she makes me laugh. What more could I possibly want?" "You could want someone who understands your responsibilities," Mrs. Russo shot back. "Someone who can help you maintain your social position, someone who can be an asset to the family business." "I want someone who makes me happy," Chris said simply, "and that someone is standing right here." Emma felt her heart swell with emotion, but she also felt the weight of the impossible situation they were in. She could see the pain in Chris's eyes as he faced off against his mother, and she realized that no matter how much they cared for each other, this conflict would never truly go away. "Chris," she said softly, touching his arm, "maybe we should continue this conversation another time." "No," Chris said firmly, turning to look at her. "Emma, do not let her scare you away. This is exactly what she wants." "I am not scared," Emma lied, though her voice shook slightly. "But I think your mother and I need to have a conversation, alone." Both Chris and his mother looked surprised by this suggestion, but Emma had made up her mind. If she was going to have any chance with Chris, she needed to face this head-on. "Emma, you do not have to do this," Chris said, but Emma was already walking toward Mrs. Russo. "Mrs. Russo," she said calmly, "I understand that you are concerned about your son's future. As his mother, that is your right. But I think there are some things you should know about me before you decide that I am not suitable for him." Mrs. Russo looked intrigued, despite herself. Such as the fact that I have no intention of trying to change Christopher or pull him away from his family," Emma said, drawing on all her professional experience dealing with difficult people. "I admire his dedication to his work and his sense of responsibility. Those are some of the qualities that drew me to him in the first place." Mrs. Russo's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained skeptical. "And what about your own ambitions? Do you expect my son to support you while you pursue your little charity work?" Emma felt anger flare in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "My little charity work is a career that I am passionate about and good at. I support myself and have no intention of asking Christopher for money. What I hope to offer him is something that money cannot buy: genuine love and partnership." "Love?" Mrs. Russo repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. Love does not pay bills or maintain social standing. No, but it makes life worth living, Emma replied. Mrs. Russo, your son saved your family business when he was barely out of college. He has proven his competence and dedication over and over again. Do you not think he has earned the right to choose his own happiness? For a moment, Mrs. Russo looked almost vulnerable, and Emma caught a glimpse of a woman who was genuinely afraid of losing control of her carefully constructed world. But then, the mask slipped back into place. This conversation is pointless, Mrs. Russo said coldly. Christopher will come to his senses eventually, and when he does, you will be nothing more than an embarrassing memory. Emma felt as if she had been punched in the stomach, but she forced herself to remain calm. Perhaps, but until then, I intend to make him as happy as I possibly can. Mrs. Russo turned away without another word, walking back to her car with the same purposeful stride she had used to approach them. As the black sedan pulled away, Emma felt her knees go weak with relief and delayed shock. Chris was beside her immediately, pulling her into his arms. Emma, I am so sorry. She had no right to speak to you like that. She is your mother, Emma said, leaning into his warmth. She loves you and wants to protect you. I can understand that, even if I do not agree with her methods. You were incredible, Chris said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. The way you stood up to her, the way you handled yourself. I have never seen anyone manage to rattle her like that. I did not rattle her, Emma said with a shaky laugh. I think I just convinced her that I am even more unsuitable than she originally thought. Good, Chris said fiercely, because I am done caring what she thinks is suitable. As they stood there on the sidewalk, holding each other in the glow of the streetlights, Emma realized that everything had changed. They had crossed a line tonight, made their relationship public in the most dramatic way possible. There would be no going back now. Chris, she said softly, are you sure about this? Because after tonight, your family is going to make our lives very difficult. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Chris replied, cupping her face in his hands. Emma Roberts, you are worth fighting for, and I intend to fight for you every single day if I have to. As he kissed her gently under the Los Angeles stars, Emma felt something inside her chest crack open and bloom. For the first time in her adult life, she was truly, completely, terrifyingly in love. And despite everything that lay ahead of them, she had never felt more hopeful about the future. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of stolen moments and careful planning. Chris and Emma saw each other whenever they could manage it, but always with the awareness that they were being watched. Mrs. Russo had made good on her promise to make their lives difficult, and Emma found herself dealing with everything from mysterious problems with her work schedule to photographers lurking outside her apartment building. This is insane, Sarah said during their lunch break, sliding a tabloid across the table to Emma. You are actually in the gossip pages. Look, Transportation airs Mystery Woman. Who is Emma Roberts? Emma stared at the grainy photograph of her and Chris leaving a coffee shop, her stomach churning with anxiety. This is what I was afraid of. I never wanted this kind of attention. The article is not that bad, Sarah said, trying to be encouraging. They call you refreshingly down to earth and mention your work at the clinic in a positive way. That is not the point, Emma said, pushing the paper away. The point is that this attention could affect my clients, my work. What if the people I'm trying to help see this and think I'm just some rich guy's girlfriend playing at being a social worker? Is that what you think you are? Sarah asked gently. I do not know what I am anymore, Emma admitted. A month ago, my life was simple. I knew who I was and what I wanted. Now everything is complicated and messy and you are in love, Sarah finished with a knowing smile. Emma could not deny it. She was completely, hopelessly, terrifyingly in love with Christopher Russo. The problem was that she was no longer sure love was enough to overcome the obstacles they were facing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chris. Can you meet me at Griffith Park? I have news. Emma's heart sank. In her experience, I have news was rarely followed by anything good. But she texted back, that she would be there in an hour, and tried to prepare herself for whatever bomb was about to drop. She found Chris sitting on their usual bench, staring out at the city with an expression she could not read. He looked tired, as if he had not been sleeping well, and there were lines of stress around his eyes that had not been there a month ago. "Hey," she said softly, settling beside him. "You look like you have been wrestling with bears." "Close," Chris said with a rueful smile. "I have been wrestling with lawyers, accountants, and my mother's guilt tactics. Sometimes I think the bears would be easier." Emma's heart sank further. "What kind of news do you have for me?" Chris turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "The good news is that I have figured out a way to make this work. The bad news is that it is going to require some major changes." "What kind of changes?" "I am leaving the family business," Chris said simply, and Emma felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "What? Chris? No, you cannot do that because of me. Your family's company is your life's work." "No, it is my family's life work," Chris corrected gently. "It was never really mine. I fell into it because of circumstances, but that does not mean I have to stay forever." "But what will you do?" Chris's face lit up with an excitement Emma had never seen before. "I am starting my own company. Sustainable transportation solutions, electric vehicles, alternative fuel systems, carbon-neutral shipping. It is something I have been researching for years, but I never had the courage to pursue it." Emma stared at him, torn between admiration and terror. "That sounds amazing, but Chris, starting a new business is incredibly risky. What if it fails?" "Then it fails," Chris said with a shrug that was more confident than he felt. "But at least I will have tried to build something that matters to me, instead of just maintaining something that was built by someone else." "What does your family think about this?" Chris's expression darkened. "My mother is threatening to disown me. My father is disappointed but trying to be understanding. My brothers think I have lost my mind. And Vanessa Wellington is apparently spreading rumors that you are some kind of gold digger who has manipulated me into abandoning my responsibilities," Chris said grimly. "I'm sorry about that. I know it is unfair to you." Emma felt a familiar stab of hurt, but she pushed it aside. "I can handle rumors. What I cannot handle is the thought that you are giving up everything you have worked for because of me." "I am not giving up anything," Chris said firmly. "I am choosing something better. Emma, for the first time in my adult life, I am excited about the future. I wake up in the morning looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. That is worth more than all the family approval in the world." Emma wanted to believe him, but the practical side of her brain was screaming warnings. "Chris, what if this does not work out between us? What if we break up and you have given up your family and your career for nothing?" "Then I will still have my self-respect," Chris said simply. "And I will still have a business that I built based on my own values and priorities." "Emma, you did not manipulate me into this decision. You inspired me to remember who I wanted to be before family obligations took over my life." Emma looked out at the city spread below them, trying to process everything he had told her. The rational part of her brain was terrified by the magnitude of the changes he was proposing, but another part of her, the part that had been dormant for years, was thrilled by his courage and determination. "There is something else," Chris said, and his voice was suddenly nervous. "The new company is going to require a significant time investment, especially in the first few years. I am going to be working constantly, traveling frequently, basically living and breathing this business until it gets off the ground." Emma's heart sank. "So you are breaking up with me?" "No," Chris said quickly, turning to face her fully. "Emma, I am asking you to take that leap of faith we talked about. I'm asking you to build this new life with me." "What do you mean?" Chris took a deep breath, and Emma could see that he was gathering his courage for something. "I mean that I love you. I am completely, irrevocably, head over heels in love with you, and I cannot imagine building this new life without you by my side." Emma's heart stopped. "Chris, I know it is crazy," he rushed on. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months, and I know this is not the most romantic setting for this conversation. But Emma, you have changed my entire perspective on what life could be. You have made me want to be better, to do better, to build something meaningful instead of just maintaining the status quo. Chris, I love you too, Emma said, and the words felt like a revelation even to herself. But love does not solve practical problems. Starting a new business is going to be incredibly stressful. Adding a new relationship to that mix is exactly what I need, Chris finished. Emma, I do not want to face the challenges ahead of me alone. I want a partner, someone who believes in me and supports me and challenges me to be my best self. I want you. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. What exactly are you asking me? I am asking you to move in with me, Chris said simply. I bought a house last week. Nothing fancy, just a small place in Silver Lake with good light and a yard for Rio. I am asking you to make a home with me while we both figure out what comes next. Emma stared at him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was proposing. Moving in together was a huge step, especially given the circumstances. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not just love, but genuine partnership, the promise of building something together, instead of simply falling into something convenient. What about your family? If you move in with me, there will be no going back. They will never forgive you. Then that is their loss, Chris said firmly. Emma, I spent years trying to earn their approval, and it was never enough. I saved the company, I followed their rules, I dated the women they chose for me, and they still treated me like a child who could not make his own decisions. I am done living my life for other people. Emma thought about her conversation with Mrs. Russo, about the cold dismissal in the woman's eyes. She thought about the gossip articles and the photographers and the way Chris's brothers had looked at her the one time they had met accidentally at a restaurant. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then she thought about the way Chris made her laugh, the way he listened to her stories about work without trying to fix everything, the way he had stood up to his mother to defend her. She thought about the excitement in his voice when he talked about his new business plans, and the way her heart raced every time he smiled at her. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," Chris repeated, as if he could not quite believe what he had heard. "Okay, I will move in with you," Emma said, louder this time. "I will take that leap of faith, Chris Russo, but I have conditions. Anything. I keep my job at the clinic. I do not care how successful your new business becomes. I'm not giving up my career. I would never ask you to. And we get a bigger bed. If Rio is moving in too, we are going to need more space." Chris laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the evening air. "Deal. Anything else?" "Just one more thing," Emma said, standing up and pulling him to his feet. "If we are going to do this, we are going to do it right. No more hiding, no more sneaking around. I am tired of acting like we have something to be ashamed of." "What are you suggesting?" Emma grinned, feeling reckless and brave and completely alive. "I am suggesting that we go to the most public, most photographed event we can find and make it clear to everyone in Los Angeles that we are together and we are not going anywhere." "And what event would that be?" "The Los Angeles Film Festival Gala next week," Emma said. "The same festival where we met. I think it is time we made a proper entrance." Chris pulled her into his arms and spun her around, his laughter echoing across the park. "Emma Roberts, you are magnificent. Have I mentioned that I love you?" "Once or twice," Emma said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him, "but feel free to keep saying it." As they walked back to the car hand in hand, Emma felt as if she was stepping into an entirely new version of her life. It was scary and uncertain and probably completely insane, but for the first time in years, she felt truly, completely alive. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Epilogue. 1 year later, Emma stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the Silver Lake house that had become their home, trying to calm her nerves before the biggest night of their lives. The Los Angeles Film Festival Gala had become an annual tradition for them, a celebration of how far they had come since that first fateful encounter in the elevator. "Are you almost ready?" Chris called from the bedroom. "The car will be here in 10 minutes. "Almost," Emma called back, taking one last look at herself in the mirror. The dress was simple but elegant, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She had learned to navigate the world of public appearances over the past year, but she still felt more comfortable in her work clothes than in formal wear. She found Chris adjusting his tie in front of the bedroom mirror, looking handsome and confident in his tuxedo. The past year had been good to him. Starting his own company had been challenging, but it had also given him a sense of purpose and energy she had never seen before. Sustainable Solutions Transport was still small, but it was growing rapidly, and Chris had never been happier with his work. "You look beautiful," he said, turning to face her. "Ready to face the photographers?" "As ready as I will ever be," Emma replied, smoothing down her dress. "Do you think your family will be there tonight?" "Probably," Chris said with a shrug that had become much more relaxed over the past year. "But it does not matter. This is our night." The relationship with Chris's family had improved somewhat over the past 12 months, though it would probably never be completely smooth. His father had eventually come around, impressed despite himself by the success of Chris's new venture. His brothers had grudgingly accepted Emma after she had proven she was not going anywhere. His mother remained coolly polite, but she had stopped actively trying to sabotage their relationship. The car ride to the gala was comfortable and familiar. They had done this enough times now that Emma no longer felt nervous about the red carpet or the cameras. What she felt instead was grateful for this life they had built together, for the chances they had taken, for the love that had grown stronger with each challenge they had faced. "Chris," she said as they pulled up to the venue, "before we go in, I have something to tell you." "That sounds ominous," Chris said with a smile. But Emma could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. "It is not bad news," Emma said quickly. "At least I hope you will not think it is bad news." "Emma, you are scaring me. What is it?" Emma took a deep breath, suddenly nervous about his reaction. They had talked about the future many times, but always in vague someday terms. This was the first time she was bringing up something concrete. "The clinic offered me a promotion," she said, "Director of Community Outreach. It would mean overseeing all of our community programs, developing new initiatives, working with other organizations across the city." Chris's face broke into a grin. "Emma, that is fantastic. You have been working towards something like this for years. When do you start?" "That is the thing," Emma said, fidgeting with her purse. "It would mean a significant increase in responsibilities, longer hours, more travel. And it would also mean—" "What?" "It would mean that we would need to start thinking seriously about the future, about whether we want to get married, have children, buy a house together instead of just living in your house. All the big decisions we have been putting off." Chris was quiet for a moment, and Emma felt her heart rate increase. They had been living together for a year, but they had never formally discussed marriage or children. She had assumed they were heading in that direction, but maybe she had been wrong. "Emma," Chris said finally, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you what you want our future to look like," Emma said carefully. "Because if you take this promotion, I want to make sure we are on the same page about where this relationship is headed." Chris laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the enclosed space of the car. "If I take the promotion?" "Emma, of course you're taking the promotion. It is exactly what you have been working toward. But what about us? What about us?" Chris reached over and took her hands in his. "Emma, I have been carrying an engagement ring around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to propose. I think this might be it." Emma's heart stopped. "You have been carrying around an engagement ring for 3 months, Chris confirmed, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. "I bought it the day after you moved in, but I wanted to wait until I was sure you were ready for the next step." Emma stared at the box, her eyes filling with tears. "Chris." "Emma Roberts," Chris said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that was exactly her style. "You have made me braver, happier, and more myself than I ever thought possible. You have supported my dreams and challenged me to be better, and you have made our little house feel more like home than anywhere I have ever lived. Will you marry me?" Emma looked at the ring, then at Chris's hopeful, nervous face, then back at the ring. A year ago, she had been a single woman with a quiet life and simple goals. Now she was about to become engaged to a man who had turned her world upside down in the best possible way. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Chris slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility. "So," he said when they finally broke apart, "ready to make this announcement official?" Emma looked down at the ring sparkling on her finger, then at the red carpet stretching out in front of them, then at the man who had changed everything. "I think we should start with the people who matter most. Your family, the film festival organizers," Emma said with a grin. "I want to request that they put a plaque in that elevator. Emma and Chris Russo met here on June 1st, 2024. Sometimes the best things happen when you are going nowhere fast." Chris laughed, pulling her close as the car door opened and the photographers began calling their names. "I love you, future Mrs. Russo." "I love you too, Mr. Sustainable Transportation Solutions," Emma replied, stepping out into the flash of cameras and the warmth of the Los Angeles night. As they walked down the red carpet hand in hand, Emma thought about the woman she had been a year ago, riding alone in an elevator and convinced that her evening was ruined. She could never have imagined that getting trapped would be the best thing that ever happened to her. Sometimes she reflected, as Chris stopped to pose for pictures and she showed off her engagement ring to the reporters, the most beautiful love stories begin with the most ordinary disasters. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, they never end.